Any other questions?
Is one of the reasons that you don't need to license a clinic associated with the fact that herbalism isn't a licensed practice?
Well, yeah, and part of it is it's not a licensed subject. And that brings us up to a whole different point. We applied to be licensed in I don't remember, I'm going to say 88. It was pre-90s, I'm sure. And the Alberta Health Occupation Act at that point in time designated there wasn't enough practitioners in the province and there wasn't enough harm, so we actually have this on our letterhead, to have any problem to the public, and therefore you don't have to license. They have now come back and say, well, maybe it should be licensed, but there's not enough, so they haven't pushed it. One of the reasons we don't really want it to be licensed, because if it has to be licensed, then you have to go to a trade school to do it. And there's a whole set of bonds and things that a trade school has to have, which would increase your tuition by about 50%.
Is that like a career college? Is that what that means?
Yeah, it's no different than becoming a pipe fitter.
Yeah.
It has to be has to go through a whole bunch of regulations and things like that. Not that I'm against the regulations themselves. It's when the regulations are terribly bureaucratic and they don't really have any basis in any kind of necessity or reality. That's where it becomes a problem.
And is that the same thing as being accredited?
It is partly the same thing as being accredited, but not the same.
So could you be accredited but not?
You would not be accredited without being bonded / trade school status.
Okay.
So it's no different than up to this point in time, even ambulance drivers were not regulated, but they're in the process of being regulated right now. Acupuncturists now are regulated, and that's why they're accredited, and that's why they're given doctors of Chinese medicine right now. So at the same time we applied for it, the acupuncturists applied for it, and their reason is because they were sticking needles into people. That made sense, and they went with that, but it took them 15 years to go through all the various paperwork to actually get that through.
So that means prior to that you couldn't get a doctor of Chinese medicine?
Not in Canada. You can get a doctor of Chinese medicine, but you couldn't use it in Alberta.
Okay, no.
So you can get a doctor. They can't stop you using the word doctor, but they can stop you from actually practicing as a doctor. And so it took a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of years to get that in Alberta. And the only reason they got it in Alberta, because it was already existed in California and BC. All said and done, all the work and effort was put in it. It was just proven that other jurisdictions had it. Since there is no place in North America that has a jurisdiction of doctor of herbal medicine, it would be a very, very hard road to walk. Even though a herbalist, by the time they finish the clinical herbalist, literally have the same level of education as an acupuncturist does, no question. And in fact, I've even had people who've gone through the acupuncture college says, oh my God, even though they had to memorize a lot of acupuncture points, the amount of information they have to learn to become a herbalist is much larger, because you have to learn pharmacy, you have to learn anatomy and physiology, you have to do them both, but you also have to learn the various pathologies and the biochemistries and literally a little bit of anthropology, etc. So it's much broader in that sense.
And were previous acupuncturists kind of grandfathered into the designation?
To a degree.
Yeah.
They were grandfathered / had to write a set of exams.
Okay.
So, for example, I was grandfathered because I was an acupuncturist when the law came through, but I had to write the exam and pass through the exams and stuff like that. So, literally, I am legally viable to do acupuncture, but I didn't go through a school that gave me a doctor of Chinese medicine, so I wouldn't be able to call myself a doctor of Chinese medicine, but I could still practice. So you could practice acupuncture without being a doctor of acupuncture. It was just the schools that came along later that made them doctors.
So that means, like with Wild Rose College, if we became licensed like that, could clinical herbalists that already had graduated be grandfathered into
Typically the answer is yes.
Yeah.
No, typically they would be able to be grandfathered into the practice, but they would still, they wouldn't get the designation of doctor unless that college decided to give an honorary diploma degree for that.
Right. Okay.
Which could make sense.
Yeah.
But I would say the probability of that happening in the next 10 or 20 years is relatively low, for the simple reason that of all the paperwork that has to be done.
Yeah.
But as paradigm shift, it might be completely different, you know, and there might be some person that just really loves doing that kind of stuff and really takes it to task and works their way through it. So unfortunately at this point in time, well, you know this going through your PhD program, that the designated doctor doesn't necessarily mean the amount of schooling you have.
Yeah.
It's the amount of hoops you've gone through and the right hoops that you've gone through. It literally is that. My daughter graduated with her master's last week, and I happened to go to the UBC ceremony for graduation, and some of the PhDs people got there were, oh my God. One guy got a PhD in backpacking in Europe, and another one got a PhD on how gay men seduce other gay men. PhDs, yes, absolutely. So, I mean, and the backpacker was how to utilize backpacking travel guides for your best benefit. That was his PhD.
It sounds like
That's
a-
brilliant.
It's actually cool when you think about it. I agree, but that was his PhD. And then there was other PhDs right beside that. They're looking at the effect of neutrinos on star systems. You know, like, geez, that sounds like a PhD. But there was some that really didn't.
Adam is like, oh, I've been traveling through Europe for the last 4 years.
You know, it does have a different manifestation of what the various PhDs can be. And let's put it in perspective. UBC is usually considered in one of the top 10 universities in the world. So this is not a sluffy university. It's definitely one or two in Canada, depending on how you rate them and what department you rate it at. So, you know, it's either McGill, McMaster's, and or UBC are in the top tier in Canada. So, and worldwide it has a good reputation. Not like Oxford or Harvard or Yale, but still fairly high on the list. Any other questions?